This one coming in from, I don't know, said, RN, first time seeing you, and I just want to thank you for being so well-versed and prepared. Best debater I've seen in a while and way more patient. And in terms of, I think they're saying, like, you're a very patient debater as well. And so you got a fan out there. Next up, coming in from Luke Stevens, thanks for your question, says, Dr. Jackson, what evidence would conclusively prove to you that creationism was false? In other words, is your theory falsifiable?
Well, the same thing would be true from the person's other comment. These majority of educated scientists see that the entire universe and all of the evidence says that evolution is true, ignoring the fact that this is interpretation of the data and the evidence that is saying that. So the same thing is here. Asking that kind of question and throwing it out, which I've heard so many times, it goes both ways. What would it take to say that evolution isn't true? What would it take to say that creation isn't true? So much of the data is easily accommodated by really any paradigm that somebody subscribes to. And we need to admit that nobody is objective. We all are.
I'm objective, and one of the things that would disprove evolution. One thing that would disprove evolution
is not something that's possible even in science because we're all human. I admit that.
One thing that would disprove evolution, as I've often brought up in the past, is Pegasus. You find a hexapod mammal where a mammal suddenly has dinosaur feathers. That goes against evolution. Evolution cannot account for that. That would effectively disprove evolution. That animal could not have evolved. That would have to have come about by some other means. What Dr. Jackson is doing is Ken Ham's provision of saying that no evidence will ever change his mind, but that's not my position. I will change my mind. I don't have a choice. If you show me that the evidence is against me, or that the evidence is not even sufficiently for me, I will obligately change my mind. I don't have a choice in the matter. I also want to throw in one other thing, that given that 700 scientists with maybe 700 scientists with acceptable academic credentials out of 480,000 U.S. Earth and Life scientists, only that many give credence to creation. So that means 0.1%, or 0.14% of Earth and Life scientists give credence to creation. So why he says it's not a consensus, that it's not absolutely everybody, it is greater than 98.44%. And I think that's pure in most cases. So that is a consensus. And there is not, and this is important, there is not any evidence that indicates creationism. There not only is there no evidence, there is not one argument, never has been, that is both true and indicative of their position. Not one, ever.
Consensus doesn't make truth. We voted Pluto out of the solar system, and Pluto doesn't care. The truth doesn't care about our opinions or which beliefs we have or our interpretations of any of this. And as far as evidence, I mean, there is genetic evidence. There are interpretations of the exact same data that do support the creation model.
All right, that will be another debate. I challenge you. There is zero evidence of creation. Not only is there no evidence of creation, not even a valid argument. All you have, everything you have for creationism is frauds, falsehoods, and fallacies. There's nothing else. There's literally no truth to it at all. You cannot even address the evidence for evolution or against creationism. None.
Folks, want to let you know a couple of things about the questions. One, thank you so much for your questions. Thanks for your patience in putting them into the Google Doc. I do have to mention, whether it be for either side, if it's like the super chat of like, oh, Aaron is dodging, or oh, Dr. Jackson is dodging, it doesn't really add value to our Q&A when you just make assertions like that. So I'm not reading those super chats, even though it's a super chat. It's just, it waters down the value of the Q&A when it's just these empty assertions and like claiming people are dishonest or whatever. Standing for Truth, thanks for your question, says, human chromosomes have revealed large linkage blocks with little to no scrambling. If deep time evolution were true, the genome would be far more scrambled due to recombination and gene conversion. The genome looks young. How does Aaron explain this data?
It doesn't look young and it wouldn't be scrambled. That makes no sense. Why would you assume that? What does scrambled even mean? But that makes no sense in anything. Well, they do genetic phylogenies. I've got lists of genetic phylogenies. It's kind of my hobby. There's no such thing as scrambled DNA. It's a nonsense question.
What Standing for Truth says here is, ironically, not true. We do not expect a scrambled genome, and frankly, based on my experience, I doubt he could explain what that means. What he's getting at is something called linkage disequilibrium, which varies widely across human lineages. Let me start with an analogy. You can think of this like a deck of cards. When you take a new deck out of its box, the cards are in order by number and grouped by suit. So all the hearts are together, the 2s are near the 3s and the 4s, but far from the 10s. In other words, the order of the cards is at disequilibrium. But after enough shuffles, any card of any suit is approximately equally likely to be near any other card. At that point, they are at equilibrium. So let's bring this back to Homo sapiens and our genome. The relevant context here is the out of Africa hypothesis, which states that Homo sapiens originated in Africa and subsequently radiated throughout the rest of the world. As we migrated, we experienced a series of founder events, where a small fraction of a larger population disperses to a new location. When this happens, the founding population, the group that left, takes with them only a fraction of the genetic diversity found in the parent population. This is just simple statistical sampling. If you take a small slice from a large pool, you're not going to get a representative sample. So there is less genetic diversity in these small founder groups. This is called the founder effect. Another consequence of this process is that as you lose diversity, you end up with big chunks of DNA called linkage blocks that are the same in every member of these founder groups. So this is like your poorly shuffled deck of cards. Certain specific genetic traits tend to be found together with other specific genetic traits, something we find to varying degrees among human populations in most parts of the world. This is in stark contrast to the parent populations, where you have more diversity and greater mixing and recombination between diverse genomes. So that larger parent population is more like your well-shuffled deck of cards. It has lower levels of what's called linkage disequilibrium. This is what we see within African populations, exactly as we would expect if we originated in Africa and radiated outwards through a series of founder events. In fact, you can plot a measure of linkage equilibrium as a function of distance from Addis Ababa, the capital of Ethiopia, and derive a linear relationship. The farther you go, the greater the disequilibrium. This is one of many pieces of genetic evidence that points towards an African origin for Homo sapiens. In addition to linkage equilibrium, we also see the highest levels of raw genetic diversity and heterozygosity within Africa, and lower levels outside, declining as you get farther and farther from East Central Africa. And finally, when you construct phylogenies of all extant humans, all non-African lineages nest within the African clade, meaning that all humans are descended from a most recent common ancestor within Africa. Importantly, this is exactly what was predicted based on paleontological evidence before we had any of the genetics. Once we sequenced enough human DNA to test the out-of-Africa hypothesis genetically, we did so, and it passed with flying colors. The predictions that we would find what I just described were spot on.
This one coming in from Standing for Truth as well says,
Why do you call yourself Standing for Truth when you don't have any truth behind your belief perspective at all? If you're stooping for lies, call yourself Stooping for Lies.
We're going to jump to their next question from Standing for Truth says, how does Aaron explain the mitochondrial DNA component of humans that is both fast and low in genetic variation, parentheses, roughly 20 to 25 DNA differences separating any two people? There would be far more diversity and DNA differences if deep time evolution were true.
All I can say about this, I'd have to look it up because I don't know off the top of my head, but everything we've ever done for that Standing for Truth has said, or Raw Matt or any of these clowns, is when I get an actual scientist in an interview to say, hey, this is what this creationist Yahoo said, they start laughing at the ignorance of the claim that the creationists made. So I'll be happy to take a snippet of that. bring it to actual scientists who work with genetics, and then we'll find out what their examination of that is, because I have no idea what he's even referencing.
Ah, this is one of my favorites. Standing for Truth is parroting this talking point from Dr. Nathaniel Jeanson of Answers in Genesis. What Dr. Jeanson does is take data from pedigree studies, studies of differences in the genomes between parents and their kids, calculate the mutation rate based on the total differences in that single generation, and then divide the total number of mitochondrial differences we see in Homo sapiens by that per generation rate he calculated. He can then calculate a range of what's called the time to most recent common ancestor, or TMRCA, based on different average generation times, and arrives at a time to most recent common ancestor of about 6,000 years. There are a bunch of problems with Dr. Jeanson's work here, but I'll focus on the big error. You cannot extrapolate the one generation pedigree mutation rate back indefinitely to calculate a TMRCA. Why not? Because most of those mutations that you document in a pedigree study won't last very long. They're gone after just a few generations, if they even last that long at all. The only mutations that can be passed to offspring are those that occur in the germline, the cells that will make sperm or eggs. The rest, mutations that occur anywhere else in the body, are called somatic mutations and can never be inherited. The DNA in your muscles or your skin is never passed on to your kids. But pedigree studies still catch those somatic mutations, so the rate you calculate based on pedigrees is way too high. But it gets worse, because most gametes don't result in a zygote, so even most germline mutations won't make it to the next generation. And even those that do are almost always lost via drift and/or selection in subsequent generations. So the pedigree mutation rate that Dr. Jeanson uses isn't a little bit too high, it's orders of magnitude too high. I'll also note here that in talking about this exact thing on YouTube with Standing for Truth, he agreed with what I just said. To do the math correctly, you account for the loss of most mutations over time by directly measuring the rate of mutation accumulation. These calculations, contrary to what creationists like to claim, are based on known, documented divergence events between human lineages, such as the settling of Europe about 45,000 years ago, or Japan about 32,000 years ago. Some calibration points are even within recorded human history, like the settling of Vanuatu about 3,200 years ago, or the Canary Islands just 2,400 years ago. When you do these calculations correctly, you don't get a time to most recent common ancestor of 6,000 years. The actual time, based on observed mutation accumulation rates, is 100 to 200,000 years. Now, Standing for Truth makes an additional error here by citing the average divergence between any two people, about 20-something differences, rather than the maximum of about 120, maybe 130. The maximum is what matters because you're trying to document the range of time back to the most recent common ancestor for everyone, not just any two random people. So you have to consider the most divergent mitochondrial genomes in the population. It's super simple if you think about it for like 10 seconds. If you calculate the TMRCA for two people who differ at 20 base pairs in their mitochondrial genome, are you going to be able to get 120 differences in that same amount of time? No, it's going to take longer to build up higher levels of divergence. So to work backwards to that most recent common ancestor shared by everyone's mitochondrial genomes, you have to consider the maximum, not the average. And again, when we do this, we get a mitochondrial time to most recent common ancestor of 100 to 200,000 years, not 6,000.
But I'm betting that the past is the key to the present, and that creationists always saying stupid shit that never turns out to be true is going to be consistent again. I'm going to bet that it's going to happen again.
Always?
Always.
This one coming.
So everything.
Not one argument ever that was both true and indicative of your position.
Would you like to hear one?
Oh, you don't have one, but please present one.
Well, the Genographic Project found in the early 2000s that all the human race, every member of the human race today alive, comes from one of 4 gene pools. And I thought about that, and how does that finding actually fit with the creation model? I was thinking, genetically, should all people be one of 4 gene pools? And not 20, not just two, but one of four. And yes, I'm going to go to not Ecclesiastes, but Genesis and Noah's Ark and the literal interpretation of that biblical account, and say that on Noah's Ark, which of course we would all be related to the three breeding couples that were on Noah's Ark, and there were actually 4 gene pools on the Ark. All humans do come from one of 4 gene pools, and there were 4 gene pools on the Ark. There was the Noah family, which included Mr. Noah and Mrs. Noah, and the 3 boys. But it also included their 3 wives, which presumably could have been from 3 different families, and excluding inbreeding and stuff like that, which would make 4. Now, I did not just prove Noah's Ark, but how much data actually fits the model that well for evolution? This happens to actually do what you said nothing ever does, Aaron.
Right, and it doesn't.
It
For
fits
example,
the data actually fits the creation model in this
except
case.
that it doesn't. Evangelical Christian Francis Collins is the director of the National
He's from my
Institutes of
town,
Health.
Stanton, Virginia.
And he says that there cannot have been a population of only 2 people, that Adam and Eve do not fit the evidence, and that there cannot have been a population of less than 10,000 people, that genetically that is impossible.
You're quoting somebody, and I'm quoting data.
Yes, I'm quoting the director of the Human Genome Project.
So you have
I think
faith
that
in
counts as
him.
data. That's not the only Christian geneticist I could cite. There are a couple others that I have
I'm not
worked with.
counting votes. I talked about empirical evidence.
I'm talking about professional geneticists who say that you are wrong.
It's true. Don't you agree that's true?
We have professional geneticists who are Christian and who say that you are wrong on this.
Sure, I
And
disagree
they have
with
the
lots
data.
of people.
They cite the data to back up why you are wrong on this.
Well, I just cited the one thing you said I couldn't do. And
You made a claim that hasn't been substantiated, which I bet you won't be able to substantiate, because I've seen some of your presentations. I doubt you can substantiate anything, honestly.
You're saying that Spencer Wells of the Genographic
Present your
Project,
data. Present your data.
Hold on. We do have.
I've already given you.
fact check it. Spencer Wells with National Geographic conducted the genographic study and found, and it's now in textbooks. It's in Kenneth Miller's edition of his biology textbook, that all humans come from one of 4 gene pools. That's established.
Yeah, it may have come from 4 gene pools. It may have, but
well, it
Kenneth
did.
Miller,
That's data.
I could ask Kenneth Miller about this, because I've done a few interviews with him, and he also cites Francis Collins, and the 2 of them are in agreement, along with some of my Christian
I know they're
teachers
both
also,
believing
that there was
Christians.
never less than 10,000 people. So the 4 genomes cannot have been the fictional character for the guy who never existed, on the boat that never happened, and the flood that never happened, and the 3 wives.
But
That's not your 4 genomes.
gene pools.
You might be able to.
If
to
it
concoct-
happened, there'd be 4 gene pools in the human race today.
You wouldn't
not
have
20.
4 gene pools for the reason I just explained. But let's get a geneticist to explain it in a little bit more detail.
Well, a geneticist would just fact check and agree with me that all humans come from one.
Geneticists will just fact check and agree with you. So
Yeah.
Francis Collins will just fact check and contradict what he himself previously said, because I can get Francis Collins to comment on this.
Oh, no, I'm not talking about Noah's Ark. I'm just talking about the bare data, which I keep saying the evidence is interpreted differently by the 2 paradigms. I am saying this is
You're not interpreting evidence at all.
Sure, what? You are. Everybody does. Everybody
You don't.
interprets evidence.
You
Nobody
don't.
is objective. You interpret all evidence through the evolutionary paradigm, as I interpret all evidence through the creationary paradigm. It's impossible.
You don't interpret evidence at all. You ignore it.
I'm not ignoring the 4 gene pools, but you are.
I'm not ignoring the 4 gene pools. I
must
said that they can't
move
constitute
on.
a population of less than 10,000 people. That's already been verified. And if we're talking about 4 different gene pools, we're not talking about one collective family from the Middle East.
We have many
They
questions.
didn't import one bride from the Orient, another bride from South America, then another bride from South Africa. They didn't do that.
We don't know what
You're not
the
going to be able to
diversity
get 4
was at
gene
that
pools
time.
out of that.
There's a lot going on here, but Dr. Jackson is referring to work done by a number of young Earth creationists, notably Dr. Nathaniel Jeanson of Answers in Genesis and Dr. Rob Carter of Creation Ministries International, who claim that the phylogenetic structure of Homo sapiens supports the story of Noah's Ark, with all of humanity being descended from 3 founding families, each of Noah's sons and their unnamed wives. Dr. Jackson mangles this a bit with the idea of 4 gene pools, 1 for each daughter-in-law plus Noah's family, because once Noah's sons start having kids, they're mixing their genomes with those of their wives. So the actual creationist claim is that we can detect these 3 specific lineages in the genetic structure of existing humans. When you make a phylogenetic tree of human mitochondrial DNA, creationists claim that the 3 central nodes or branch points represent the 3 wives. The problem is that when they make this claim, they, without fail, use an unrooted tree. This just means that they aren't showing the direction of descent among the different groups, just the pattern of relatedness. But they ignore the fact that the lines on the tree that connect the nodes represent descent, and that those 3 central nodes are directly linked. This means the pattern they claim, 3 unrelated individuals from which 3 distinct groups are descended, is contradicted by the phylogenetic tree they use to make their argument. To resolve the question of how the populations represented by those 3 nodes are related, you have to root the tree, meaning you have to assign one branch as representative of the most recent common ancestor from which all the other groups on the tree are descended. There's no one correct way to do that, but there is no way to do it that gives creationists the answer they want. Putting aside that these nodes represent populations, and treating them as creationists do as individuals, the possible patterns are a parent and 2 siblings, or a grandparent, parent, and child, depending on where you put your root. And don't just take my word for it. This work has actually been done for real with Dr. Jeanson's raw data. You end up with 2 of the supposed wives nested within, which is to say, descended from, the 3rd. The inescapable conclusion is that these data don't support the creationist narrative. They refute it. What we've seen are all of the potential interpretations of Jeanson's tree, and there is no way to root that tree and make it fit the young Earth creationist narrative. So let's look at Jeanson's tree, his real tree, and root it for real using the actual techniques. These figures come from Evograds' excellent debunking of Jeanson's book, Replacing Darwin. This is specifically from part 6 in that series. I will link it down in the description, and I've said this before, but I will say it again. That series is the definitive written takedown of Jeanson's book, Replacing Darwin. So here is the unrooted Jeanson tree. This is Evograds reproduction using the exact same data, gets the exact same tree that we've already seen. The 3 nodes that Jeanson identifies as the 3 daughters-in-law are shown with the red arrows, 1, 2, 3. And then here we have the rooted tree using the L haplotype of the mitochondrial genome as the ancestor. So we're rooting with the L haplotype, which are the branches that are in black. And then you have the other main branches, M, N, and R, in the different colors here, pink, kind of turquoise, and green. What you see here is that you don't have 3 coexisting individuals leading to 3 distinct branches. Instead, you have one node right here that represents the node in the middle, and then descended from that, you have the other 2 nodes here and here. So you don't have 1, 2, 3, you have a nesting relationship where you have 1, and then descended from that, the other 2. That is apparent from this unrooted tree, but it becomes crystal clear when you root it that you are not representing with the unrooted tree 3 separate lineages. You are representing a ancestor-descendant relationship. The only question is what is the exact nature of that relationship based on where you place the root of the tree. Jeanson has written that he can root it at the L haplotype, and when you do that, you get the tree shown right here, which violates the requirements of the young Earth narrative that you have 3 distinct clades that do not nest within one another. So, to summarize, Dr. Nathaniel Jeanson claims the 3 nodes on a phylogeny of human mitochondrial DNA, an unrooted phylogeny, I should say, represent Noah's daughters-in-law. He shows this using an unrooted tree, but misreads the tree not realizing that the way that tree is shown represents ancestor-descendant relationships. Rooted or unrooted, the relationships contradict the young Earth narrative. So the conclusion is that there are not three distinct branches of human mitochondrial DNA as the young Earth narrative requires. Instead, as with all DNA, with all lineages, there are ancestor-descendant relationships, and there is a nested hierarchical pattern, which is exactly what you would expect based on evolutionary theory.
I want to thank Dr. Dan for stepping in to fact check on demand, as both sides of this debate asked for someone to do so. Dan is a teacher of genetics at university, and when he's not doing that, he dedicates his expertise to countering creationist nonsense. His channel doesn't get enough views, not as many as it should, so I put the link in the description. Go show him some love. Now, scientific debates should be done in writing so that both parties can read whatever citations the other side has. And when we do that, I find that the creationist citations never actually say what they claimed it would. Part of the problem that Dr. Jeanson and I had was that I understand a gene pool to be the total genetic diversity found within a population or species. And remember that the cited data only talks about mitochondrial DNA, but the Y chromosome in this hypothesis would have been passed to all three boys by Noah. So that's one population, not three, and certainly not four. I don't have a problem with there being 3 or 4 genetic lineages. That's better than when creationists say they found unfossilized blood cells in dinosaur bones, or pre-Columbian dinoglyphs in Peruvian stones, or anything that Ron Wyatt claims to have discovered. But it's not enough for the claim to be true. It was also supposed to be indicative of creation. Jackson said there was genetic evidence of creation. I said there wasn't, and that's when he was supposed to have presented some. So what is evidence? The fact that indicates. And in science, facts must be empirical. That means objectively verifiable data. Facts and evidence that are positively indicative of and or exclusively concordant with only one available position or hypothesis over any other. We can't both be looking at the same evidence, and not just because one of us obviously isn't looking at it at all or is only cherry picking the parts he likes, but also because if the same fact could still be true in either scenario, then it wouldn't be evidence of either one. It's just a fact. It doesn't become evidence until it implies one or eliminates the other. For example, Dr. Jeanson could just as well have said that all living humans have inherited their Y chromosome from one original source, Y chromosome Adam. And that would have been true in either the evolution model or what Jeanson thinks counts as a creation model. But that fact doesn't become evidence until we realize that the point of Spencer Wells' original study was to genetically map human migration, and that this exact same data also implies that Y chromosome Adam lived in Africa 60,000 to 90,000 years ago, and that he was part of an already existing population of at least several thousand humans, even way back then. What Jeanson called the bare data wasn't just a cherry-picked out-of-context snippet of nothing relevant. The raw data actually showed 3, not 4, genetically distinct lineages that could not have been coexisting individuals and could not have lived only 5,000 years ago and didn't live in the Middle East either, but instead originated in Africa, tens of thousands of years earlier, with 2 lineages descending from a third, the L haplotype group, which Jeanson himself unwittingly said. Those are the objective facts of the matter. But Jeanson misinterpreted all of that to ignore most of it and pretend as if it implies 3 girls living at the same time, in the wrong time, and in the wrong place, thousands of miles away and tens of thousands of years later, being off by at least an order of magnitude. So I will still challenge any creationist to engage me in an exchange where I show you the facts and evidence for evolution, and you try and fail to produce an argument that we can both confirm is true and indicative of miraculous creation according to your sacred fables. What you got?